Welcome back, David. It's going to be sensitive this week. Hope we don't get banned. Every time we talk about some hard science, we get a little warning that this
Well,
is misinformation, even though it's from medical studies. But
it
it is what it is. So I
is
want
what
to
it
pick up
is.
your brain about GLP-1. What don't we know? Because majority of people, uh, in UK specifically, you'll just hear skinny jabs. That's how everyone calls them. Like you take this and you're gonna get skinny. What what
Well,
what don't we know?
yeah, it's not just the UK. This is everywhere, everywhere. You mentioned GLP-1. Oh, it's the weight loss drug, the weight loss drug, the weight loss drug. And they're not wrong, right? Very few people will have ever experienced so much dramatic weight loss. I mean, it's unreal how much weight you can lose. So don't get me wrong. Do you lose weight? 100%. Is it a useful tool? Yes, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how it's being explored not just for weight loss because of these interactions that I'm going to talk about. And that should start to like make you ask the question of like, oh, there are potential problems here because of these other interactions that it has. Okay. So let me share my screen just so that we have something to talk to as far as here we go.
I know in UK there have been so far 82 people that have suddenly ended
Yeah.
because of this. So how the hell does that even happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's quite a few. There's the obvious one, right? So let's talk a little bit about kind of what this is, right? Let's pretend you're going into the doctor and he's like, oh yeah, maybe you're a candidate for GLP-1 drug. These are all the things he's not going to tell you, right? The first thing he's going to tell you is, oh, this is just for weight loss. It's going to make you not eat. It's going to slow down gastric motility, if he says that, and things of that nature, right? And most people associate all of the effects with like food intake. Okay. And so here's what you really have to know, right? POMC. If you've been following our channel at all for any length of time, you've heard this before. Pro-opiomelanocortin is the thing in the hypothalamus. And it's not just located in the hypothalamus. It's located in lots of different places. This particular peptide turns into things that tan you, like alpha MSH. It turns into or it turns into um, uh, um, several different cleavage points that control everything from how you tan to pain tolerance to hunger, like what we're going to be talking about. It turns into just about every single peptide that's going to control your life, essentially, right? That's the easiest way to think about it. We can get into details of like how that splits up, but that's not really relevant at this point. The point is this: the gut secretes GLP-1 after you eat food. This is a very crucial thing to understand. That is the sequence of events. And the thing that needs to be kind of brought to the forefront, the sequence of events matters. It matters a lot to the body because nothing is out of sequence in the body. If it is out of sequence, things go wrong. Okay. So you eat food, GLP-1 gets secreted. That GLP-1 interacts with the liver, the pancreas, and the brain through the brain gut axis. And it also and the way that it does that is through the vagus nerve, right? So that's the sequence of events. It's very important to understand. Food goes in the mouth, goes in the gut secretes the GLP-1, it talks that direction. It can also talk in the opposite direction, right? So because it's going through the vagus nerve, which is why the drug works, right? The drug works in these other formats that we're going to be talking about, as far as like other things that it can interact with. It works the other direction as well. If you have GLP-1 floating around and the brain picks it up, it can now slow down gastric motility, right? Which is one of the known side effects. It's probably one of the main side effects that people should watch out for. in most circumstances. It can slow down gastric emptying to the point where you can actually get bowels that get obstructed, right? That's actually a real problem if the GLP-1 dose is strong enough. And that will land you in the hospital, right? So that's like an immediate thing. If you take too much of it, you're not going to go to the bathroom for a while, and that could end up with a blockage. So that's how that ends up working, right? Here's another little thing where it shows you just how much it interacts with everything else, right? So I'm going to zoom in here, right here. Okay, here we go. Um, so the gut also, you see GLP-1 right there, and you see clock genes, CB1 receptors, those are endocannabinoid receptors, and we see ghrelin, gastrin, and uh, nephastin, right? So the gastrin is going to be the thing that slows down motility. But you see over here, this leptin and white blood or white adipose tissue in the blood, right? That's what this represents here is blood vessels. That's talking directly to the brain. The brain then can talk directly to the gut and the GLP-1 and the stomach, right? And they do this in a very unique way. This is how GLP-1 came to be the forefront drug for weight loss. A lot of people don't know this, but leptin was going to be the first one because they discovered it, and they discovered that, oh, mice that have a leptin problem will all of a sudden lose a lot of weight and completely regulate the amount of food that they eat when we restore leptin correctly. The problem is leptin has or requires two steps. Number one is what's shown in this picture, which is it needs to be in the blood. But if you notice here, it is in white adipose tissue. How does it get released from adipose tissue or body fat? It gets released by UV light. Leptin has a light emission spectra or absorption spectra of 280 nanometer light. That's UVC. To be clear, UVC doesn't exist on the planet. We don't get UVC from the sun. It gets blocked by the atmosphere. So how do we get UVC stimulation on white adipose tissue? It's called melanin is a semiconductor, and whenever sunlight, which is UVB, right? Strong sunlight goes all the way down to, or all the way up to as powerful as UVB. Whenever it hits melanin, it can be stepped up to UVC through semiconductor processes. And your own body can make very low levels of UVC. So there's two ways to make UVC on this planet. We've already talked about them, but now I'm going to highlight them. Obviously, the first one, sunlight interacting with melanin. You can internally create this same level of low-level UV light through cold exposure. So back to what I said way, way, way early. Hey, there's two ways to keep things rolling correctly on this planet. You get sunlight when it's sunny. When it's cold, you get cold. Why? Because it's a master controller of leptin, which most people are going to associate, just like GLP-1, with appetite, but it's controlling just about everything about your metabolism, not just how much food you consume. It controls how fast your metabolic rate is, how slow it is, etc., all of those things. And so white adipose tissue requires UV light, UVC light, to release leptin into the bloodstream. And then, and only then, can leptin interact with the hypothalamus. Here's the catch. It only does it around midnight while you're asleep, because that's how it's going to know what to do the next day, right? Because it has to interpret how much work is this person doing? How much damage has they done during the day, et cetera, right? It needs to account for what happened yesterday, and it anticipates something similar happening the next day. So that's how it can regulate very precisely how much food intake and how much energy expenditure to govern, right? That's another thing that these control that people don't talk about. It controls energy expenditure. If you are stimulating GLP-1, not only does it tell the brain, hey, you're eating plenty of food and you don't need to eat any more food. It's also telling the brain exactly that. You ate plenty of food. We should ramp up energy expenditure. We should make you more active. We should make you feel more peppy, right? So it starts to interfere with, well, interfere is the wrong word. It starts to modulate human behavior at the same time as behavior around food. So activity and well-being, those types of things. So leptin can only be let into the hypothalamus around midnight to properly assess what has happened during the day. Here's the problem. You need a quiet electromagnetic field around the brain so that the brain accurately knows that it is midnight, right? Remember, everything is about timing. If it's not timed correctly, the body skips over the step because it doesn't want to mess up any of the things that are in play already. So if you're around a lot of electromagnetic fields, leptin never gets let into the hypothalamus, which is why when they were developing or trying to develop a synthetic leptin to modulate weight loss, it didn't work. It worked 50% of the time, right? It was hit and miss, is essentially what they found out. And the reason is because they don't understand that they need to control for electromagnetic fields at night to let leptin into the hypothalamus. They were doing this step 100% correctly, right? They were having plenty of leptin in the blood, but still sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't because they weren't understanding that it needs to have this secondary action that only happens at a specific time of day or night, I should say, and it can be circumvented by the modern world. So then that leads you to, okay, it doesn't really work. What are the downstream things that leptin causes that does control weight loss? And that's when they found GLP-1, they found gastrin, ghrelin, et cetera, all of these other downstream hormones. So they started trying to develop any of these. They ended up developing GLP-1, right? So basically, they sidestepped the leptin story, use GLP-1 to control your appetite. Now, let's get into what GLP-1 does. Food intake goes down, but here's a very, very important one. Water intake goes down. Now, these are so powerful that you don't really have control of how much it impacts you. People will report this a lot, like, oh, I take this and all of a sudden I'm not hungry for a whole day and I forget to eat, right? Well, you'll forget to drink too, right? Unless you're actively like changing a whole bunch of things about like what you do, alarms, et cetera, all of those types of things. And even then, the GLP-1 receptor in the brain is also going to control not just the water intake, right? The water intake is very broad. It's going to control the water in the brain, meaning your CSF. It's going to change brain pressures. It's going to change a whole bunch of physics that happen in the brain that allow it to work correctly, which is why some people can experience extreme amounts of fatigue, extreme amounts of brain fog. They attributed that they're not eating food, but there is a brain component to this, right? And here's another unique one. Insulin is going up, right? That's not like most people think that, oh, because originally when these drugs came out, they thought they were going to control diabetes. Turns out they don't do that. Why? Because it causes insulin to go up. Why? Because GLP-1 is only released after food intake. So when you administer GLP-1, what is it going to tell the pancreas? Hey, you ate some food. We need to bring up insulin, right? So what happens if you're already in an atmosphere that you are already insulin resistant? You're going to accelerate insulinemia. You're going to accelerate those types of scenarios where you have excess insulin going on. What do we know about people that have uncontrolled insulin? We know that they start having retinopathy. We know that they start having eye problems. We know that they start having uh, issues with like periphery nerves, all of those things, right? So the cohort that are being targeted are also the cohort that are potentially in a high insulin state to begin with. And now you're going to cause them to use more insulin and secrete more insulin. and they're probably already taking insulin. So you see how this kind of gets compounded?
Yep. And I see it a lot. Well, the most common I see is inability to go to toilet. That's
Yeah,
number.
that's a big one.
So, and obviously, from what I've seen so far, it doesn't resolve the problem, which in my eyes is choosing things that are not healthy for you. You just eat
No, because
it,
it
but
gives
you
you
still
so
eat
much
things
leeway.
that are just still harming you.
Mhm. Yeah, you're still going to choose cake, right? You're still going to choose cake. You're still going to choose tasty foods that probably do this even more,
Hmm.
right? And so then that leads to vision issues, rare but unusually permanent, right? Let that sink in. Vision issues that are rare but unusually permanent, meaning once you mess this up, you messed it up for good.
Hmm.
This is not something your doctor is going to tell you. And this is right from studies finding rare vision issues with taking GLP-1 with, this is just reported literally a month ago, right? Um, this is actually coming out of the UK, I think, is one of the places that's leading this, where the focus in patients with semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic, tirzepatide, you name them, all of them. It's not one, it's the fact that there's GLP-1 in here that's causing these effects that we went through is going to cause potential vision problems. Now, how is it going to do that? It's going to do it through this right here, the uh, anterior optic neuropathy. So essentially, exactly what diabetics get, optic neuropathy, because insulin is always being secreted. So imagine you're taking a GLP-1 drug that causes all of this to happen for 48 months, right? You, which is what the studies are showing, right? Hey, you can take this safely for 48 months. Well, not if you're in the wrong cohort, right? If you're already a very overweight, very insulinogenic person, this could actually make things worse. Now, I'm not saying that, in my opinion, right? This is my opinion at this point. If you are somebody who already is in this problem, can a GLP-1 drug help you get out of it? Yes, but it's not going to be with a doctor prescribing you a dose and then saying, come back every 12 months, right? Once a year to adjust, or once every 6 months. And we plan on taking it for as long as it takes. This is a drug where I would say you're better off taking the biggest dose you can that does not affect the gastric emptying too much, so you can still go to the bathroom. And you essentially do this like a crash diet, right? This goes back to one of our earlier videos not too long ago, where we said, hey, can you lose a bunch of weight really quickly? The answer is yes, right? The answer is 100%, especially if you have something like this on board that just makes you not eat, right? We know this from fasting studies that if you fast somebody for 30 days, they will lose an enormous amount of weight. That's how this should be approached if you are in the cohort that is already predisposed to having lots of insulin in the background. So this goes back to something that we've always harped on. Before you endeavor in anything, especially if there's going to be a medication, you need blood work. Because if the blood work comes back and your fasted insulin is like a 15 or a 20, right, in American units, when it should be like a 4, you're already a candidate for potential eye problems with this drug. You're already a candidate for exaggerating neuropathy with this drug,
And that one
right?
read is usually something that nobody checks.
Correct. They just check your glucose and your A1C, and that's it, right? No insulin. We want to know your insulin because we know for a fact you're going to be taking a drug that increases the insulin, right? That's the thing is if you don't know the right questions to ask, you quickly get put in a high risk category, right? If you know this ahead of time, hey, I already have high insulin. I'm going to take a GLP-1 drug because I'm 100 pounds overweight or whatever, right? I don't have a problem with discussing that scenario. But then it goes, okay, there's going to be a potential downstream problem here with high insulin in the background that can potentially give you eye problems, potentially give you neuropathy, potentially exaggerate any high insulinemic problem. And that's also going to cause, what do we know about Parkinson's and Alzheimer and dementia and all of these types of things? They're an insulin problem in the brain. It can exaggerate those if you're of the right age group, right? So everything that mainstream media is telling you about, low carb diets and high insulin are problems and all of that, they're promoting a drug that literally is causing an exaggeration of the problem if you don't know what you're looking for, right? So just to kind of talk through this scenario, you're somebody that's 150 pounds overweight or 100 pounds overweight. You have high insulin. We know this because you took blood work before you took the drug. Then we go, okay, here's the strategy. The whole time you're taking this, we need to control insulin to the maximum degree. That means you're going to choose only whole food choices, nothing to digest quickly and causes extra insulin spiking. You're not going to consume nearly as many refined carbohydrates, or ideally zero. You're going to have lots of vegetable, basic good nutrition, as if you were trying to handle this without the drug. But the drug is going to be there to accelerate the weight loss so that you get in a healthy weight range and a healthy blood pressure range because you've lost all this weight. And at the same time, you're changing the dynamics of how insulin responds in your body. Then,
Sushi with white rice might not be the best choice, and some baked potato with steak would be a little bit better.
correct, right? In other words, the people that this is targeting as like the thing that's going to cure you needs to be accompanied with real coaching, because they need to be held accountable to what's going in their mouth so that they don't increase insulin too much while they're taking the
Because I
drug.
think you and me can agree that these kind of things more likely than not will happen with people who don't work out, don't consume enough protein, uh, don't do any kind of physical activity, because that's what essentially is getting targeted. Like people who are struggling to lose their
Yeah,
body weight because their behaviors are not there. And I understand
yeah,
that it's much harder to change behaviors and changing your physiology through drug. But if the education is not there, that's where we see these tragic stories coming up now.
yeah, correct. Because they're not being told any of this. Your doctor is not going to tell you any of what I just told you, right?
And I think it's not because they don't want to tell you. It's more often they're just not educated. They
Correct, right?
look
Like,
for
you know why? Because the
information.
person that educated the doctor is the sales rep that sold them the drug.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of that. 100% agree with that. And more often than not, it's doctors believe still that they are doing more good than bad if they just blindly just go with it. Uh, and I understand that the workload for them is insane. Like
I don't
myself
disagree
and
with
you,
that.
we are more focused about what is causing this rather than how can we put a plaster on this issue.
Yeah, yeah. Now, before we move on much further, there is one more cohort that also is, I wouldn't say being targeted because they won't be approved if they go to a doctor, but these are people that are being interacted with by electromagnetic fields. Now, I know I talk about this a lot, but this is because I deal with this a lot. Okay. Most people at this point realize that they can go black market and get any one of these GLP-1 drugs, right? It's very tempting to be like, hey, no matter what I do, no matter how much I try, I can't lose weight, or my hunger is ridiculous. I don't understand how I'm so hungry all the time, and I'm eating it doesn't matter if I'm eating 2,000 calories or 5,000 calories, I'm still hungry. Those people will turn to this drug, and they might find that only this drug controls their hunger. And here's the reason why. We go back to here, oh, this one right here. What did I tell you actually controls GLP-1? Leptin. So if you are somebody who's being interacted with heavily by electromagnetic fields, I'm going to list them right off the bat, right? Like you don't have to tell me much more other than, hey, I live within half a mile or a mile and a half of an airport. I live on a military base. I live near a hospital that has a helicopter landing pad. I live anywhere where there is consistent radar, consistent sonar. You're going to have a leptin problem. That leptin problem means that your leptin is never going to get let into the hypothalamus, which means that your GLP-1 secretion is going to be subpar or almost non-existent, no matter how much food you eat. So you're going to be one of these people that has uncontrolled hunger and has uncontrolled ability to put on body fat and find it incredibly hard. And on top of that, when you do diet, GLP-1 is never secreted to the right amount. So that's what is that going to tell your brain? It's going to tell your brain, hey, you didn't get enough food. You can't expend as many calories. You're going to feel tired very, very easily, even though you might not even be in a calorie deficit. You're going to be putting on body fat at an accelerated rate because when there is an electromagnetic field, what do we also know? Insulin is high because electromagnetic fields manually stimulate the pancreas to release insulin. How does it do that? Through the cell stress response. In other words, cortisol is being secreted at an accelerated rate whenever you have a cellular stress event going on. What's the result from cortisol? Insulin response. So even though you might not be obese, you're already having high insulin and you're already having a GLP-1 problem. So then when you go and you take a GLP-1 drug, you fix this signaling right here. You fix the signaling of liver and pancreas now starts coordinating like you have ate and things of that nature, and you start losing weight. I've seen this more than a dozen times with private clients where we properly assess, hey, the reason you're having this problem is an electromagnetic field problem. And immediately they go, can you prove it? I'm like, yeah, take 1 milligram of GLP-1. The moment they take 1 milligram of GLP-1, next thing you know, they're like, wow, my hunger is completely normal. I have complete thinking capabilities of that. And not only that, their calories don't change, right? So in other words, we've gone through the normal stuff of this should be your calorie deficit. And they're losing weight, a tiny, tiny amount. But they're ridiculously hungry and they can't really keep up with it. But the moment you introduce a little bit of GLP-1, same calories now continually cause more and more weight loss because the body is ramping up other things like exercise activity, the ability to release body fat into the bloodstream appropriately, and all of those types of things. And they start losing weight even on 1 milligram. And so then the only thing that we do have to worry about is this problem. Because they're around a heavy electromagnetic field all the time, they're always going to have background insulin. So they need breaks from that, right? How do you regulate insulin or cause insulin to not cause the same type of neuropathy and things of that nature? Cold exposure, right? Whenever you're around a lot of electromagnetic fields, the solution for insulin is cold exposure. These are people that even though they might live in Texas or Florida or whatever, they're going to need a lot of cold because they're around an electromagnetic field all the time. That's how they're going to prevent that. And what else do we know about electromagnetic fields? Let me go to here. They dehydrate your brain. They dehydrate all cells. So if you're taking a GLP-1, the other hidden thing when you're in around an electromagnetic field is water intake, sodium intake. Keeping cells hydrated becomes number one priority. So things like special water, deuterium depleted water are going to be very, very beneficial in this particular case. So knowing what you're looking for starts building a completely different game plan for one person using GLP-1 versus a different person using GLP-1.
You're going such a deep rabbit hole if you think the way I do, because I'm like, okay, you mentioned cortisol, that means testosterone is going to get tanked somewhere along the line. Then you need
That's right.
thyroid. It's basically if you are not assessing environment in which you are introducing this stuff and pairing it with habits that keep insulin in bay, you essentially can ruin everything down the line. It's like that's how it sounds.
100%. Yeah, you're not wrong. You are not wrong. The way you said it is precisely how people need to think about it. I'm taking a GLP-1 drug. I need to know exactly what it does. And then I need to assess my environment to see what parts of my body are responding to my environment in a positive or negative way that may conflict with the drug I'm going to take. Now, tell me which doctor does that for you.
Yes, I don't. And is there something that people could do at home? Let's say maybe there is some kind of cognitive test that they can do before and after taking this, or maybe some sleep recovery tests, like, hey, do I actually improve my sleep or what's happening there? Uh, Maybe assess if their patterns for what they crave change. They're not going to eat as much, but do they still crave highly palatable food?
Well, so one of the things would be um, insulin, like regularly testing your insulin. And by regularly, I mean like once a quarter, right? Like while you're taking this drug, once a quarter, once every 4 months. That's very easily done, especially in the, like if you know what you're looking for, the test should cost you like $100, right? Like because you only need insulin and because that's the thing, right? If you are in any of the scenarios, the two scenarios I described, somebody around a lot of electromagnetic fields or somebody around, that's obese, but not necessarily because of electromagnetic fields. Insulin is going to be the biggest thing that you want to be tracking and looking for to making sure that you have it under control, and those sorts of things so that you don't run into neuropathy and eye problems and all of those. There won't really be a cognitive test because by the time cognition starts to be impaired, you're almost too far down the road, if that makes sense. You've already started to make more damage enough that you can notice, right? And so insulin beforehand, before starting the drug, while on the drug, and subsequently is probably going to be your biggest indicator of whether you're doing your job correctly as changing your habits of what you're eating, changing your habits of what you do with your lifestyle, or changing the habits around the electromagnetic fields that you exist under, right? Other things that can mitigate this response from electromagnetic fields is shielding blankets, right? Things like electromagnetic field shielding blankets, or even, if you work from home, going out of your way to shield that the room you work in or the bedroom you work in. Things of that nature can be helpful. Again, it depends on exactly the situation, right? If you live right next to an airport, I probably wouldn't waste money on anything other than maybe a shielding blanket, right? Just because you're going to get that effect from the blanket versus doing your whole, room. You're not going to, it's too strong. If you're within a mile of a radar station, you're getting bombarded, right? So it's one of those things where spend the least amount of money to get the minimal effect that you might get.
And it
And what
sounds like it probably would be useful to get one of those electromagnetic field like equipments just to check your house. It's
correct, right? So that's the thing, right? Like if we assess, hey, you're not obese, but you have a really bad time with like gaining weight easily, not ever losing body fat, uncontrollable hunger. And then we look at your living situation and you're like, oh, right, you literally live next to an airport or on a military base. Then it would be like, okay, let's check your home, right? Let's see how bad it is. And maybe, right, maybe depending on your home construction, we find a place in your root in your house that has very little electromagnetic fields compared to the other. That's something that is totally possible, especially if you have a basement.
I've seen it a lot. And actually, this brings me to attention that I need to go and check one of my clients because their neighbors just installed a Tesla charger attached to house next to
Oh,
where he lives. And there have been, he's been prone to injuries ever since. So,
okay. Yeah, that's not a coincidence. Yeah. Yeah. So again, it is beneficial if you assess your situation and you're like, okay, this is highly likely that I'm being interacted with by electromagnetic fields. It might be worth, hey, scoping out your house or having somebody come monitor it. So maybe you can assess, hey, maybe this is the least part of my house that's affected. Maybe I start working from there if I work from home or whatever it might be, right? There are it's hard to give you all the different examples of the solution that might happen or a workaround that might happen because electromagnetic fields are so variable. They really are. Like you, as much as like I've been like, oh yeah, that's clearly going to be high or that's clearly going to be low. You don't know until you test. It's really that simple because we just don't know how electromagnetic fields interact with every part of your home.
Yeah, this I think there is so much more to unpack here because especially how it affects your everything down the line. And this one little things that people completely overlook and that most doctors and even private clinics rarely include the test for insulin in your blood. You
Mhm.
need to specifically ask. I haven't seen a single like a pre-stacked panel that does that unless you
Yeah,
specific.
the only one that I have is the one that I use in the US from Life Extension. It has just about everything, and it does have insulin, but it's one of the few, like not too many have insulin, fasted insulin. And that's the other thing. People need to understand that you need to take it fasted so that you see what your background insulin is being secreted when you're not eating any food, right? So because that tells you, right? Most people are like, my fasted insulin tells me nothing, so they don't include it.
And it's not
Your
saying
fasted
blood
insulin,
sugar because people might
no, no, it's not the same, right? And I'm like, no, your fasted insulin tells us what your pancreas is being stimulated to secrete when you don't have food in the background, right? So what is that telling us? It's telling us the environment. What is your environment? Both internal and external, right? If you have low muscle mass, your insulin might be susceptible to going higher very easily. If you have high amounts of muscle mass, a little bit of it, you can handle more insulin because more muscle tissue is going to be able to be sensitized by that insulin, stimulated by that insulin. So it tells us a lot about your internal environment, your insulin sensitivity, and your external environment by stimulation of the release of insulin or not, whatever might be happening. So that's a very valuable test, specifically with this drug, specifically with this drug. And here's another thing right before we go. You we spent a little bit of time at the beginning that POMC is the thing that's controlling a lot of this action. POMC is tanning internal structures. In other words, there's two types of melanin, external melanin, internal melanin. They have a specific name, but you don't really need to know that. It's just that there's internal melanin, out external melanin, and that is being created by POMC. When you use the GLP-1 drugs, it can potentially dehydrate internal melanin in the brain. That's going to potentially lead to things like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease at an accelerated rate or faster than it should occur because what do specifically Parkinson's, it's associated with the secretion or inability to make dopamine. Dopamine comes from tyrosine and phenylalanine, but the action that those need is UV action. What did I say earlier about melanin being a semiconductor and creating internal UV light? That is created by melanin. So the dopamine that's being made in your brain specifically is being created by melanin in the brain, releasing internal low level UV light, UVC light. If you're degrading the melanin in the brain, you're going to make less dopamine, right? If you're dehydrating the melanin in the brain, you're going to essentially bleach the insides of your brain and you're going to create less dopamine over time. So the side effect from long-term use of GLP-1 is you might exaggerate the need for dopaminergic stimulation. What does that mean? It means you're going to crave more things when you stop using the drug, if you use the drug for long enough and dehydrate the brain for long enough.
And that probably doesn't mean just food, but essentially things that excite you.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, David. We'll finish on that bombshell. And this has been eye-opening, and I'll see you in next video.
You're welcome.